It is hard to imagine now a world where survival was not a matter of ambition, but a daily miracle. A world frozen beneath miles of ice, where hunger howled louder than the wind. A world where the human race, fragile and uncertain, stood on the very edge of extinction. This was the worst time to have ever been a human. 40,000 years ago, the Earth was a place of endless winter. Vast glaciers consumed the northern continents. The air was colder, drier, and thinner. Entire species vanished under the weight of snow. For the first time in our history, humanity faced not one challenge, but a perfect storm of them. A collapsing climate, vanishing food, spreading disease, and the silent terror of isolation. The story of this age is not only written in fossils and bones, but in the scars that still linger in our DNA. It was a time when three species of humans, Homo sapiens, Neanderthals, and Denisovans, walked the same earth. But only one would survive. For the Neanderthals, this was the twilight of existence. Once masters of Europe, they had weathered the cold for hundreds of thousands of years. They knew how to make fire, shape tools, and hunt the great beasts of the Ice Age. Yet something had begun to change. The forests they depended on were disappearing, replaced by barren tundra. Mammoths and bison grew scarce. Storms became longer, harsher. Slowly, the world that had once been their home began to turn against them. Archaeological evidence tells us that Neanderthal tribes shrank from thousands to hundreds, from hundreds to dozens. Small groups of families wandering across frozen valleys, searching for food that no longer existed. They were not the brutish cavemen once imagined. They were intelligent, emotional beings. They buried their dead and cared for their sick. But care could not save them from hunger. Deep inside caves like Shanidar in Iraq and Vindija in Croatia, their bones whisper of disease and starvation. Cracked teeth tell of malnutrition. Fractured ribs speak of desperate hunts gone wrong. In some caves, the marks on bones suggest something darker, perhaps cannibalism, or the ritual dismemberment of their own kind. Whether born of madness, starvation, or belief, it reveals a species pushed beyond the brink of reason. Meanwhile, far to the east, another group, the Denisovans, lived in the highlands of Asia. They were adapted to cold altitudes. Their lungs and blood evolved to survive in thin air. But their story ends almost as suddenly as it began. Few traces of them remain. Tooth, a fragment of bone, the echo of their genes, still carried by people living in parts of Asia and Oceania today. Like the Neanderthals, the Denisovans vanished into the dark. And then there were us, Homo sapiens, the newcomers. We had arrived from Africa carrying something unseen. Not just sharper tools or stronger bodies, but the power of imagination. We could plan, dream, and believe. Yet even imagination was barely enough to keep us alive. During the last glacial maximum, roughly 20,000 years ago, temperatures across the planet plunged to record lows. In some regions, the average temperature was 10 degrees colder than today. Entire continents froze. The sea levels dropped by more than 100 meters, exposing vast, empty plains where now lies ocean. The earth was silent, vast, white, and deadly. For early humans, every day was an ordeal. The wind could flay skin from bone. Hunting parties returned empty-handed for weeks. Firewood was rare, warmth a luxury. The weak, the old, and the young were the first to go. Infants froze in their mothers' arms before the sun rose. Death became so ordinary that it was no longer mourned. It was expected. Those who survived did so through ingenuity, building primitive shelters from bones and hides, learning to store food, to hunt in packs, to adapt to every fragment of land that could sustain them. But survival came with a price. It changed them, not just physically, but psychologically. Fear was constant, hunger unending. The line between man and beast began to blur. Archaeologists have found evidence of human groups resorting to cannibalism, not out of cruelty, but of necessity. In Gough's cave in Britain, skulls were carefully broken and shaped into bowls. The marks on the bones were deliberate, clean, practiced, systematic. It was survival stripped of morality, where the body became just another source of fuel. In that frozen darkness, even the idea of humanity trembled. Diseases, too, stalked the camps. Without medicine, infection spread easily. A simple wound could mean death within days. Bones show signs of ancient tuberculosis, parasites, and fevers that consumed entire tribes. Those who lived long enough grew old before 30. Yet, through all of this, our ancestors kept moving. Across deserts of ice and valleys of bone, they wandered in search of something better. The migration patterns show incredible resilience. Small bands of humans walked from the Middle East to Europe, from Siberia to the Americas, often following the tracks of animals that would soon vanish themselves. Every step was a gamble against extinction, and extinction was all around them. The great beasts of the Pleistocene, mammoths, woolly rhinos, giant ground sloths, saber-toothed cats, were dying out. Whether by human hunting or climate change, their disappearance tore apart the ecosystems that had once fed and sheltered early humans. When the animals died, the people followed. It was also a time of violence. With scarce food and territory shrinking, competition between human groups became fierce. The bones of both Neanderthals and Homo sapiens show evidence of blunt force trauma and weapon wounds, spears, clubs, and stones. The archaeological record even reveals massacres, small communities wiped out, their remains scattered and burned. These were not wars as we know them, but primal struggles for survival. The planet itself seemed cursed. Volcanic eruptions darkened the sky. The Toba supereruption, tens of thousands of years earlier, had already nearly erased humanity. Some geneticists believe that all humans alive today descend from only a few thousand survivors. Imagine that the entire human story, balanced on the edge of a knife, depending on the endurance of a handful of starving tribes. Inside their caves, early humans painted what they saw, not beauty, but desperation. The animals they hunted, the spirits they feared, the ghosts of those who did not survive the winter. The flickering firelight made these images come alive, dancing across the stone, as if haunted by memory. The art of Lascaux and Chauvet in France is not mere decoration. It is a cry from the past, a record of both fear and faith. For the first time, humans began to ask questions of life, death, and meaning. The earliest burials show offerings of tools, beads, and food. It was the dawn of spirituality. The idea that existence might continue beyond suffering. Perhaps that belief was what kept them moving forward when everything else was lost. Still, the suffering was relentless. Entire regions became uninhabitable. In Central Europe, the cold grew so severe that people abandoned whole valleys. The dead were buried shallowly or not at all, left to freeze into the earth. In Siberia, permafrost still holds their remains, curled in fetal positions, as if still trying to find warmth. It was in these crucibles of despair that humanity was reforged. The worst time to have ever been a human was also the moment that shaped what we are today. Hardship sharpened our minds. Fear taught us caution. Loss gave birth to empathy. The brain evolved to remember pain, to anticipate danger, to plan for tomorrow. Without that suffering, we might never have developed the intelligence that defines us now. And as the world slowly warmed again, the survivors emerged. The ice began to retreat. Rivers returned. Grassland spread. The human population, once reduced to near extinction, began to grow. Neanderthals were gone. Denisovans vanished, but their blood lived on within us, woven into our genes. We were not pure survivors, but the living fusion of all who came before. Looking back, it is difficult to grasp the magnitude of their endurance. They faced extinction not once, but many times. They lived without language as we know it, without medicine, without shelter beyond what they could build with their hands. And yet, in the face of endless night, They lit fires that still burn in us. The caves they left behind remain their monuments. Each handprint on the wall, each carving in stone, is a message across time. We were here. We endured. The echoes of their voices still travel through our blood. Whispers of fear, of hunger, of survival. If we could stand among them, we would see ourselves, not as conquerors of nature, but as creatures trembling before it. We would hear the same heartbeat of desperation, the same quiet prayers for warmth, food, and dawn. In that recognition lies the truth of our origin. We are the descendants of suffering, the children of ice and darkness. The worst time to have ever been a human was also the time that made us human. Out of cold came fire. Out of fear came belief. Out of death came the instinct to live. When we look at our world today, of comfort, light, and abundance, it is easy to forget how close we came to disappearing. But beneath our cities and within our minds lies that ancient memory, the ghost of a time when everything was pain, and yet, somehow, hope survived. Perhaps that is the greatest miracle of all, that through starvation, isolation, and endless winter, humanity refused to die. And when the first thaw came, and the ice began to crack, the survivors looked at the rising sun with eyes that had seen hell, and chose, once again, to live.